Welcome to Monday Morning Coffee with Inside the Firm. Each week, our hosts will be interviewing local, regional, and national business leaders to give you an inside peek into how they lead their business to success in the ever-competitive business climate.
Welcome, everyone, to another Monday morning edition of Inside the Firm. My name is Alex Gore. I'm hosting instead of Lance Psycho. I'm here with Michael Poris. Hopefully I said that right. The Poris of McIntosh Poris, a architecture firm in Detroit, which is an interesting place to have an architecture firm, and especially to do the kind of work that you're doing. I know you're all over the board, but you do some restoration. Michael, welcome to Inside the Firm.
Thanks. It's great being here, and thanks for having me.
Absolutely. The first thing that I'm interested in is talking about, you worked at a bunch of different starchitects. Tell us how you got those jobs, what they were like. Were any of the offices different from the other, or was there a general theme? Bring us back into that time. And is this the 90s?
80s.
80s. Okay. You're aging well
80s then. 80s and early 90s. Yeah.
So what were those firms, and what was your experience like then?
Well, it was a number. I think I worked in 10 offices before I went out on my own. And part of that was I was putting myself through school, and so working summers and part-time. Started out, the first firm I worked for was here in Detroit, and it was a group of 5 partners, 4 of whom came out of Yamasaki's office and 1 from IMP's. And they were the project architect in the World Trade Center. And they weren't really a star architect, but they had a great background, like in the 60s and 70s. Then I went from there. After I graduated from Michigan, I moved to New Haven, Connecticut, worked for Caesar Pelli, and for 2 years. And that one was, I had a professor at Michigan named Glenn Paulson, who had worked with Caesar at Saarinen office and still knew him well. And another one, Jonathan Crane, his father had worked with Caesar at Saarinen office. And my late business partner, Doug, had already moved to New Haven and was working there. So I had some ins. And that kind of got me an interview and got me in the door. And that was 1985. So it was coming out of the early 80s recession. Mm-hmm. And I think the office was about 15 people at that point. So I decided to go work there full time rather than going back into grad school. And in the 2 years that I was there, it grew from 15 to 70. And then it was great. It was a lot of fun. Great experience. And then I moved to LA to go to SciArc, and went to work. First place I worked was Frank Gehry's part-time, because there were a whole bunch of people working at SciArc at Gehry's building models, and just translating his sketches and just doing stuff. So I worked there part-time during my first year of grad school. And then same thing at Richard Myers. I went to work there in the model shop, which was like a 5,000 square foot model shop on the Getty Museum. Wow. And a similar thing, Robert Mangurian, who ran the graduate program at SciArc, was actually running the model shop for Richard Meyer. And so it was just, they were connections. I had a lot of friends working at Gehry's. I had a lot of friends, some friends working at Myers. And, I had abilities from working at Caesar's office with building models. And, we used to call it Caesar's, arts and crafts, because we basically built models and drew and colored, coloring and building models. So it's,
yep.
And then my first semester, I had Tom Main at SciArc. And that summer, I went to work for him on some competitions where he needed extra help. And And that, started that. And I worked for him for 2 years. The rest of the time I was in graduate school or Morphosis, him and Michael Rotundi. And, so again, it was I had him, I knew him. He was, and he needed help. He asked me to come help. And then I worked with, I had Wolf Pre from Himmelblau at SCI-Arc the following semester. And after 7 weeks, he was going back to Austria for a long time. And Tom had the Architecture Tomorrow exhibit to plan at the Walker Art Center. And he only had a $35,000 budget. So he asked me to come in and work on that. And I did, and he worked out with Michael Rotundi and Wolf that I would get credit for that. So I went back to Morphosis and worked the rest of that semester and on that Walker Art Center installation. And so, like I said, I was there for 2 years. And then after that, when I graduated from SCI-Arc, it was into the early 90s recession. Mm-hmm. Got laid off from Morphosis, and then after that, it was really just sort of, survival. It was following. Yeah. So, but at that point, I'd worked for a lot of them. I worked for Frank Israel for a while, and he lost a bunch of work, and so got laid off from there. Then I went to Japan and worked there for 4 months, building a theme park, and then I came back and worked at Keating, Manjunick, and Rote, Lauren Rote, Richard Keating, who had come out of SOM. And I was there for a couple of years as a senior designer. And then, again, this was still like early 90s. So it was recession. Then I left there and I went, I bounced around a lot, mostly finding work. And that's
how did you like Japan?
I love Japan. And it was a great, after being in school for like 10 years, working in school for 10 years, as architects, we don't realize how much dogma we learn in school. And going to Japan and working on a theme park with mostly artists and Imagineering people and set designers and colorists and all these different people. I was like a site architect illustrator. So, but working with all these non-architects, sort of realized how many rules we set up for ourselves as architects. When you're working with artists, they don't have any rules. And so, you start to realize how dogmatic we are. And it really freed me up about a lot of things that I took as, gospel, like things should line up, or, there's the piano curve. I mean, they're like stupid things that when you're working with artists, they don't have these rules on themselves. They don't put them on them. And that just really freed me up.
That insight right there was one of the first light bulbs I had working at Liebskin. So my boss there was Carla, and I can't remember how she phrased it. It's been years ago, but she said it was something like the biggest mistake is that we don't realize that we can break all the rules that we make for ourselves. She goes, We make all these rules and then we're stuck in a box and then we don't break them, but we don't realize that we made the rules. So, and why I'm reminded of that is not only because you said it, but I was listening to Elon Musk. He was touring his Starship factory with this guy that I follow. And he said, the first thing you need to do is make the requirements less dumb. And he goes, especially if the requirements were given to you by a smart person, then you need to really look into it and make the requirements less dumb. So it's we make our own requirements sometimes, and we, put them in a box, put ourselves in a box. So
absolutely. And it's not, and Japan is like a different world. And just, I spent a lot of time going and looking at traditional Japanese architecture, temples, gardens, and as well as modern, Takamatsu and Ando was the one I really fell in love with the most, who really, his work was mostly about Japanese culture. And, but it just really opened my mind up to like questioning things. Like there is no rule book. So when someone says, oh, it should be like this, like, well, where's the rule book? Where does it say that? So yeah, really opened up things for me.
Another one too. So one of our friends in school really liked Tadao Ando and would basically copy him. And that happens a lot when you're young, and that's fine. But I feel like you've seen architecture. You've been in this game for a lot of times. People get mad at people when they copy star architects, but they don't get as mad when they just copy what's normal architecture. I've designed a lot of buildings that have good design and good principles, but it's in a style that you would recognize, I would recognize, all that. But once you kind of quote unquote steal their, like a star architect, you can't do that. And I'm not saying that that's right to do that, but to bring these ideas over and to iterate on some of these styles, when we iterate on the normal styles all the time, maybe shouldn't be looked at as too bad because it could actually be an improvement.
Yeah, well, there's a history of that going back thousands of years in architecture from, Palladio and the Renaissance. Classic architecture was all about, and still is, replicating and copying. And you learn a lot from that. But where it really gets interesting is looking at the proportions and the different systems they use to like construct the stuff. And that's the important piece to learn from that, not necessarily copying, Robert Stern or whatever building. It's really, well, what are the proportion systems behind that? And with Ando, to me, it was much more about these two parts of Japanese culture, the sort of Zen, minimalism, and then the sort of exuberant, lacquer and silk and just this richness that was in their culture like 1,000 years ago that then the Zen and minimalism was a reaction to. And, Japanese culture has become about that, that richness, crazy, like Tokyo and Shinto, there was that. And then there's this other side of like the minimal and reacting to that and breaking things down to the purest. And that's what Ando's about. And it's to me, it's not necessarily about copying it. It's the idea of it,
I agree.
One form against the other, and just anyway. It's
yeah. So after navigating through the wild ups and downs that is the construction and architecture industry, you decided to start your own firm, or were you forced into it, or how did that journey begin?
So I got licensed in 1994. Yeah, 1994 in LA. And the firm I was working at that point was Nadel Partnership. And, it was a big corporate firm. And I was, one of like a handful in the design department. There were like 5 of us. There were like 200 production people. And we were just, spitting out projects like in China. Like it was kind of amazing. And I was interested in it because it's like, they turn projects out in a month that, we would take 2 years to do at Morpheus, and the 25,000 hours would go into schematic design at Morpheus, where we had 60 hours over here.
Yep.
And they were building like more buildings in LA and the Southwest than anyone else. And most of us architects never even heard of them. Right. And I thought, okay, they're having a huge impact on where we live. And I went on, like, I was really curious, how are they doing this, right? So I worked for a couple of years, and then, things got slow, and I got laid off for a short period. And honestly, at that point, I thought I had been offered projects, small projects in LA, like garage additions and typical things in LA, and small additions. And up till that point, I was just too busy working to take them on. And I had a sort of a fear, of giving up my salary. But the reality was my mother passed away a few years before that, and I had inherited some money, not a lot. But when I stopped and looked at it, it was enough that if I started working on my own, I had enough that I could not make a dime and I could live for a year.
Mm-hmm.
And worst comes to worst, I would get another project. And I really also felt like I'd worked for all these people. I was licensed. Like, there was no one left that I really wanted to work.
Yeah.
Sort of hit the wall of like, all right, I've like sucked up everything I can. And what did I do all this for? And it was really like, to go out on my own. So that's how I started.
Yeah. This is a two-part question. How was the initial phase of getting projects and growing and hiring? What did that look like? And then after you got established, contrast that with now you're maybe 5 people in your firm, 6 people in your firm, getting bigger projects. I feel like there's a difference between hiring and getting projects at that stage than you just in your house starting out growing.
Yeah. So when I started in LA, it was just me in an apartment. So, and I was getting small projects, but a small project in LA might have $10,000 fee or whatever, so working on your own out of your apartment, like, you don't necessarily need a lot of those to survive. And so, and that was, I think I started with 2 projects starting out, and, and one was a backyard addition, office addition to a house in West LA. And the other one was a great house in Venice, like right near the beach, adding an addition on the back. And, it was enough to keep me going, but I wasn't really satisfied with it. I didn't particularly like working alone. And, I wanted more than that. And so Doug McIntosh, my late business partner, was just getting projects in Detroit. He had been in New Haven for 10 years and got some projects in Detroit. We both grew up there. He didn't know anyone there because all our friends had moved away. So he convinced me to come help him on some projects. And then that was in the that was October of 1994. And by that summer, we had like 5 or 6 people working for us and had moved into an office, started out in the basement. And so then I was commuting back and forth between LA and Detroit. And then I got rid of my apartment and car and moved to Detroit permanently. But there's a huge learning curve from starting out on your own and you're doing everything yourself and you kind of know, it's pretty simple. Like you're doing your work and you do the bills. You collect. It's very simple when it's just one. When you start to add employees in, it's a totally different thing because now you're dealing with a lot of other issues, and that became a whole project in itself. And that project of managing people in an office and paying taxes and all that stuff, I didn't learn in school, and I didn't really learn it at the firms I worked in. So it was just like designing all of that. And what you find is that, it starts out with now you have a couple of people. And so your overhead grows and, so you got to keep the work coming in. And then as it gets more and more, it's like more overhead and, the first year we thought we were doing really well. And then it turned out Doug hadn't paid, he was managing the money, hadn't paid any of the payroll taxes. So it's like, payroll taxes, what's that? So I think we owed like $70,000, and it was like, oh man, we thought well. This is, that's the thing. Like, you just start learning those things, and it evolves. And it's just been an ongoing, process ever since.
Yeah, we had to tell some of our people in our firm are growing, and now they're not just managing their own projects; they're managing people under them. So let's say a new person that was a great project manager, now you're going to manage 2 other people. What I had to tell them is treat the management of those 2 other people like a project. Yes. Meaning Monday, you have to review what they're doing for the week. You have to know who's communicating, all that. It's equal to a project, managing people. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's, again, it's a different project. And you really, so there's a lot of research into like business and ways of managing people, and just, how do you keep people? There's just so much to it that honestly I've been studying for 25 years now. But I also had 10 offices to draw from. So that was the thing. I had all those experiences, good and bad, right? All different size offices, all different types of work, from very high end, architects to, spec stuff, like, all over the West or even in China. And so I had a lot of things to draw on. And one of the things I wanted to do was draw on the ones that were really the ones I enjoyed working in the most. And that was Caesar Pelleas and Morphosis. And both of them were teachers. They were studios where everyone working there was really a part of the work. It wasn't like you're doing so-and-so's work, which some of the others were. You're working, and I don't want to get into names, but you're doing somebody's work, where there it was much more, everyone was involved in it. It was much more interesting. So that was something that we've tried to keep, so that to make a place that people enjoy working.
Just to clarify on that, so let's say you're working on some mid-rise building. You set it up, and how they set it up was, you're just not executing X principles design and just being, just literally taking directions and executing. You wanted it more as a team effort. Everyone is getting their input. Am I interpreting that correctly? The difference?
Yes, absolutely. There's different. So, the Caesars and Morphosis were both set up that way, where it was much more the collective and the sum of all the people putting, input into it is greater than, just one person's thought. And it, Caesar didn't necessarily sketch. It was always about the people working on it, know much more about it. So it's like there were design crit reviews, like in school. And, and there's a measure of like how much you add to it or how much you just let the team keep going. And Tom and Morphosis were very similar at that time. So it's very much a collective. Now, the interesting thing about it is at that time, and, this is a long time ago, it was about the input from in the office, but the client's input and the builder's input and some of those other things were sort of blocked out, which, ends up with a lot of projects that didn't get built. They were over budget or, whatever. So I actually felt like, okay, well, if you're starting a project a priori without a preconceived idea, and it's going to come from this process, well, what if you include the client in that process?
You're crazy, Michael.
Right. Well, it's like, okay, we say we have no preconceived, but, so it's like, so that's been the piece that for us has always been like, it's much more challenging, but it actually gets projects built because everyone feels authorship. And it's challenging, but it's far more interesting.
Yeah. Where do you get the most of your work now? Is it really just building off of relationship development? I'll leave it open-ended.
Some of it is relationship. I mean, a lot of it is relationships and referrals, and a lot of it is just people calling us up, whether someone recommended them to us or they've seen our work, whether it's social media or articles or who knows. It's like I always saw it as a big funnel, and you're putting stuff out there, and through that funnel comes these contacts, and sometimes it's from it's all over the place. Sometimes it's from subs that we've worked with, like contractors or subcontractors, and they recommend us to someone, and they call us up. Like they're different. I mean, sometimes it's people I don't even know them, but they know us and they know our work, and they're referring us. So that's where social media and getting published and pays off, because you never know who's going to see that stuff, and are they going to save that magazine, and 4 years from now, like they remember this thing, and they call you up, and it's kind of like that.
Yeah. Switching gears slightly, you're in Detroit. Detroit's always an interesting city to me, and I think to a lot of people, just because of the manufacturing boom and then bust that happened. I don't think that a lot of people have the perspective of, when that happened, how that affected the city, what's happening to it now, because I think a lot of people have seen some of the pictures of just the desolate Detroit, just houses with no houses around it, abandoned buildings, things like that. And there seems to be sort of a revitalization happening over the past couple of years. But could you kind of give a history of Detroit from when you got there and what was happening to the city, and where it went, and maybe how it's recovering or where it's at now?
Yes, and that's actually part of what brought me back. So in late '94, when I first came back to work on a house out here in Birmingham, we went downtown, and at that point it was desolate. Like there were 90 vacant buildings downtown. You could shoot a cannon down Woodward Avenue and nobody would know. I mean, there was no foot traffic. There was just nothing, and it was pretty much about as low as it could go. And it was back then. It was like last one out, turn the lights off, but the buildings, having been away for 15 years and been in LA and East Coast, West Coast, and all over, like the buildings were amazing. And the growth that the city saw, like at the turn of the 20th century with the car industry, was like Silicon Valley. And there was so much money here. It was growing. It was New York, Chicago, and Detroit. So there were the few buildings that were left were pretty amazing, and they were vacant. And we thought we'd been in places like and seen like Santa Monica, Old Town, Pasadena, New Haven, like places where things like this had come back, like in the 80s, and we thought, well, this would be really interesting to do this here, and actually make a difference here, as opposed to, frankly, working on projects all over the world, like, and with endless budgets, like, star architects, like, a fee on a house, and it's, millions and millions. Like, yeah, if you have a giant fee and all the time in the world to study something, you better come up with something really amazing. But if you're trying to work in a depressed market, to make things happen, it's much more challenging. But really, the biggest thing was like to make a difference. And and part of that, even though it had a real modern background, but a big piece of it at the beginning was just advocacy to save the buildings and save the context of what was left from urban renewal. And the city had grown in the 20th century up until 1953, when the 1950 master plan went into effect and all the urban renewal happened. And all the freeways were built through the neighborhoods, and all the hospitals and redevelopment, and the Lafayette Park, and the neighborhoods were just destroyed. And this is in the 50s and 60s, and then by the 67 riot, it just sort of boiled over. And so there was disinvestment in the city since the 50s and declined. So by 1994, 95, it was really down, although it's fell even further since. So it was pretty desolate. There were a couple of bars where everyone would go, but it just, people didn't go downtown. It was scary. It was just, it had a horrible reputation around the country. And, it was in that context that we thought this is actually a good place for young architects to practice. And that was really like what drew us there.
Awesome. How would you describe Detroit now?
It's come a long way in 25 years. I mean, there's been billions of dollars of investment. Those 90 vacant buildings are, the ones that weren't torn down, which, was the majority of them, luckily, have been renovated. There's actually new building going on, which was our goal 25 years ago. Why we wanted to save the old buildings was so we would have a context of, old to build new in to, be more authentic. And, we didn't want Detroit to be Dallas or Atlanta or something where, you get rid of everything and just have this sterile new city. So the whole goal was, let's save these buildings. And then eventually the market will get to when we can build new, which really has just happened in the last 10 years. So now we're building new buildings, and, the market just didn't support that before. It barely does now, but now it's happening. So there's a lot of housing going, a lot more development happening. That 25 years ago, when we did housing, it was with community development corporations from churches. That's who was for profit. Didn't happen, wasn't in the market, and now it's really changed.
Gotcha. Let's see how to ask this. You do different project types, not just remodel or restoration or preservation, but that might be your favorite. What is your favorite? And if it is that, maybe also touch on some of the other stuff that you do too.
Well, it's not necessarily my favorite. I do like adaptive reuse, mostly because you're dealing with this context of a building and, how to work with it, how to make it into something new, but maintain the character and the authenticity of it, and, really change it. But everything we do, from whether it's a building renovation, an interior building renovation, a new building, to an urban design, it's all in the context of, in its context, from a room to a neighborhood. So I like all of them, honestly. We've done large urban design projects, teamed with SOM. We did the East Riverfront plan and the Greektown framework plan, and those were both big RFPs that we put these teams together and won, and those are fascinating. We won an AIA National Award for the East Riverfront. And that was a lot of that was like this riverfront that the Detroit riverfront's never been public in 300-year history of the city. And so now we have this plan it had started, but now it's going to be continuous from the Ambassador Bridge all the way to Belle Isle. And that's huge. I mean, that's like, it's public riverfront in perpetuity. That's for everyone. And that was a great project that has a lot of benefits to the city and to people visiting. And I love that. And it was all about how to make it doable and real so that it wasn't just a plan that doesn't get built, which Detroit's had thousands of. So how do you make it affordable? How do you utilize what's left of the industrial heritage of the riverfront and allow to build into that? And that was great. Favorite, we love doing house. I mean, I always like doing single family, but a multifamily, mixed use, adaptive reuse. Housing is a need. So we enjoy doing that. And hospitality, we've done a lot of restaurants and hotels, and those are great. They're like the front door of the city. So a lot of the restaurants and hotels we've done, like people know them because they're trying to make them really about Detroit. And it's like they're public and people go to them and it gives them an impression. And so those we really like doing as well.
How is the housing market there? Because in Denver and Austin and different cities, you can't buy a house unless you get there, a day before it's even available and put $20K over the asking price, and everything's already, $50K over it was last year. Is the same thing happening there a little bit, or is it steady?
No, that's been happening here for sure. It's definitely been happening outside of the city. Detroit, it's happened some, but because of COVID, it's one of those things where people have been leaving the city. Mm-hmm. So it's like we've had some condo projects where they're just not selling. And it's a little scary. Like it's like unclear, like what's going to happen in some of these urban centers. But it's definitely been happening. Prices definitely went up, like maybe more in the neighborhoods than downtown, because it's just not as busy as it was during the day. At night, it's still thriving. People are coming for, now that it's open for restaurants and nightlife. And it just seems like it's not there yet during the day. But yeah, it's definitely been like that.
Gotcha. Any other topics you want to cover? Anything you want to get out?
I guess, I think we've had a lot of people who were in our office go out and form their own firms, which I really, I'm happy about and proud of. And I think part of that is just, the way we run our office and just having them all involved in things, from meeting with clients to proposals to the whole process. And I think that's very helpful. And it's clear, like, how you run your office and the experience that people get, really affects like what they can do after, or gives them, confidence to go on. And I think, that's helping Detroit, because it's bringing up a whole other generation of architects, designers, which is really helping the design, quality here. I think that's a great thing. I mean, it's something that's been going on like New York or LA or Chicago for years. But now we're seeing it here, and that's a good thing.
Awesome. Well, thanks for taking time out of your day to do this. It was very interesting to me. I'll leave the end to you if you would let people know if they are interested in your firm, where to find that, any social media, anything like that. The floor is yours.
So, well, we have a website, www.macintoshporis.com. We're on Instagram. We're on Facebook. We're on LinkedIn. I don't know what else, but certainly can be found there and followed. And we welcome that. And we have a job posted on our Connect right now. So we're looking for people to replace interns that are leaving at the end of the summer. So, but yeah, we welcome people who are either in Detroit and want to make a difference, or coming from other places. And we've had a lot of people come from other places, move back to Detroit. A lot of them were here and come back and are interested. So it's yeah.
Yeah. The Lions are going to be on upswing. I have a feeling about this new coach, MCDC, Motor City Dan Campbell. I've looked at your website. You guys do some truly beautiful work. So if you are interested, I think when I left college, I went to New York City. I think there's a draw to go to the bigger cities. Detroit has always been interested to me, especially in that vibe of the history of the city and the ebbs and flows of that city. I think it'd be a great experience. So go check them out. Go look at them if you're interested. And signing off, I'm Alex Gore. And Michael, thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.